All right, so this week's topic is the rise of Lincoln and the start of the Civil War. We're going to talk a lot about Abraham Lincoln before he was president and the path he took to get there. We first need to kind of look back to last week and talking about all the compromises and attempts the country made to avoid war and to try to solve the problem of slavery. But they were obviously unsuccessful. Now, the party that was in control at the time was the Democratic Party. But these compromises and different events only divided the Democratic Party in half. The Southern Democrats were very extreme in their views that slavery was an important part of not only their economy but their culture. And then the Northern Democrats were not as intense, so to speak, as the Southerners. But they did believe that slavery had its place and that the federal government should stay out of it. However, they were divided as these issues began to amp up. It did sort of separate them. And part of that separation was amplified by the creation of the Republican Party. In 1854, this new party is created, basically a collection of all the other political parties that had failed, like the Whigs, the Free Soil Party, the Nativists, and then even some Northern Democrats joined them in 1854. And the Republican Party was really getting off to a good start. In 1854, they competed for the presidency. I'm sorry, in 1856 they did, but they were unsuccessful. But they were a growing party. By 1858, they had nominated Abraham Lincoln to run as a Senate candidate in Illinois, a little-known lawyer and one-term House of Representatives. Abraham Lincoln was chosen to run against Stephen Douglas, who was the incumbent, the guy who was already in power, who was already senator of Illinois, was being challenged by this new rising star known as Abraham Lincoln. And they participated in what were known as the Lincoln-Douglas debates. There were 7 of these debates, and they're legendary for the content and the things that they talked about. But they're also legendary because of the format in which it followed. It was about a 3.5 hour, it was a 3 hour debate where each person would speak for an hour and a half at a time, and go back and forth. And it was, like I said, legendary because of the issues they talked about, like slavery and popular sovereignty. But it was also legendary by the format, and in fact, the format itself is still used in some debates today. Now, Senator Stephen Douglas ends up winning. Abraham Lincoln is defeated, and it's one of many of Abraham Lincoln's defeats. But through this story that we're talking about, it shows Abraham Lincoln's ability to persevere and never quit. And that was in 1858, like we said. But 2 years later, at the National Republican Convention, where they get together to decide who's going to run as their presidential candidate and what they're going to what are their main beliefs, this convention gathers, and one of the things they agree on is that the problem of slavery needs to be contained to the South and should not be allowed to spread. And the man that they choose to represent them in the presidential race is Abraham Lincoln. So in 1860, Abraham Lincoln is competing against 2 other people. He's actually competing with 3 other people, but I'm just focusing on these 2. So we're going to push Abraham Lincoln off to the side. The 2 people he's competing against are John C. Breckinridge and then also Stephen Douglas, and both of these men are Democrats. The only difference is that they're from different parts of the country. Stephen Douglas represents those Northern Democrats, whereas Breckinridge represents the Southern Democrats. And from this political cartoon, you can see the selection is unique in how it's literally tearing the country into regions and sections, and people are more allied to those sections and regions than they are to the country itself. And these 2 men here, as Democrats, this has happened several times in history. We call it splitting the ticket. People that would normally vote for Breckinridge, that were from the North, were actually going to vote for Douglas, and people in the South that would vote for Douglas are actually going to vote for Breckinridge. So the Democrats have enormous support, but because they split the support 30%, 30%, and they win 60% of the vote overall, but because they have 2 candidates, they have to split it. Neither of these men actually end up winning, and in fact, Abraham Lincoln does with 40% of the vote. That's less than half of the popular vote. Abraham Lincoln wins. So over half the country, like I said, didn't vote for him, didn't want him as president, but he is ushered into power, and this really sets off a chain of events. He's elected in November of 1861, or I'm sorry, of 1860, and then by December of 1860, I know the date's wrong here, but by December 20th of 1860, South Carolina as a state votes to secede from the United States of America. South Carolina's fear was that Abraham Lincoln's presidency would really challenge their way of life. And many Southerners felt that they weren't represented in this election to begin with because um, no one in the South even voted for Abraham Lincoln. And they felt like because they were not the majority in the House, and they weren't the majority in the Senate, and they had just been defeated by Abraham Lincoln, a guy that no one voted for in the South, they felt that it was time for them to break away. Again, this chain of events isn't singular. It ends up like a domino effect, and 2 months later, 6 more states join South Carolina, and they secede from the United States of America, which means to break away. And these 6 states, along with South Carolina, form the Confederate States of America. And it's this collection of states that are challenging the authority of Abraham Lincoln and also the country in and of itself. And by March 4th, a month later, Abraham Lincoln is inaugurated, and he believes that the country can still be held together. And one of the quotes from his famous first inauguration speech is, "We are not enemies but friends, and we must not be enemies." The hope was that he could hold the country together and solve the issue of slavery along with many of the other things dividing the North and the South. But that simply was not able to happen. On April 12th of 1861, a month later after his inauguration, the Confederate Army launches an attack on Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter was a federal fort in Charleston, which is in South Carolina, and it was on their property, and South Carolina felt that they had ownership of it. There were some disputes on whether or not the United States Army should even be allowed to be there, and those disputes overflowed, and there was an attack on the fort, and the white flag was raised, and the Confederates had forced the Americans to surrender. And this is what really starts the Civil War. We're going to stop there for this week, but we really need to understand that Lincoln's election, Lincoln, the things that he talked about, really did scare the South. They felt that he was going to challenge their way of life, and that's why no one voted for him. And the Southerners felt that their backs were against the wall, and it was time to act in order to ensure their way of life. They felt that they had to start a war with the United States, and that was the only way to solve their issues with the Union. So, with that said, your assignment's due on Sunday night. Please make sure that it gets done so we're ready to talk about it on Monday. If you have any questions, please make sure you let me know. You guys have a great day.